Hi guys, I want to do one more video. This will get us through all of the city models. The last video got you through the main three, right? Concentric zone, multiple nuclei, and sector. And talked about some limitations of those that also, you should have also learned about the galactic city or the peripheral model, as well as edge cities and bid rent theory. This is going to talk about regional urban models. Because hello, not all cities are located in North America. And you may have remembered from the last video that one of the challenges of these models, one of the limitations, is that they pretty much typically were all done in the US and all apply to the US, but there are cities all over the world, so what about those? And so some regional urban models have come up as well. So the previous models were all created to explain settlement and urban patterns in the United States and Canada. Light bulb, this is a limitation or critique of those models. However, things look differently in other regions of the world. And that's what these urban models seek to explain. So let's just jump in. We only have like 6 slides, so here we go. The first is the Latin American city model. It was created by Larry Ford and Ernst Griffin in the 1980s and then kind of revised again in 1996. So you're going to see 2 versions, the old version and the new version. It is an important example of a colonial city. So let's just be very clear on that. Most, not all, but most of the cities in Latin America have colonial underpinnings from either the Spanish or the Portuguese. From when they settled Latin America. I think I spelled that wrong. The Spanish government in the New World, meaning, Latin America, what we call Latin America today, enacted many colonial legal codes known as the laws of the Indies. That's a term you're going to need to know, including one that talked about the construction of colonial cities, basically laying out, planning, zoning for how cities should be constructed. This is why so many Latin American cities follow this same patterns, is because the law of the Indies required it. And so what they look like. This is kind of a variation on the sector model, okay? And this is your Latin American city model. So you still have your central business district downtown. You're also going to have some sort of market down there as well. That's followed by a commercial spine. Okay, this spine, where it's sort of like, a promenade or a main street that kind of leads you into the central square where the market happens. The pink along this spine, so here and here, is where the fancy people live, where if you have money, you want to be close to, where business is done. So that is your elite residences. The brown, this, and this, is what's called the zone of maturity. So this is wealthy colonial housing, okay, so still not quite up to the elite, but still wealthy colonial housing, probably of European descent. Maturity refers to the European type of architecture and the materials that were used. So it's not like you're mature because you've grown up and you have all this wisdom. Different kind of maturity. The teal zones around those zones of maturity in the central business district is what's called the zone of in situ accretion. So outside the walls, indigenous or mixed descent housing. So again, colonial Latin America had a very distinct caste, right? And so if you had European descent, you were above those that were of Native American or Spanish, the Native American descent or the Native Latin American descent, right? And so that's going to be your teal areas. Indigenous or mixed descent housing. In situ accretion translates to growth over time in the ground, and basically refers to the building materials that were used, specifically adobe. Adobe is made from the ground. What you're going to find along the pink, your elite residences, and even your zones of maturity is probably more like stone or plaster, but adobe is going to be used in the teal area. The yellow is called, that's your peripheral settlements or your poor urban housing. So these are going to be where your slums are, where squatters settle, that kind of thing. And then the zones of disamenity, these are also squatter settlements. So disamenity here, disamenity here. Squatter communities closer to the city center built on land deemed unsuitable for standard homes or businesses. So this is where you're going to like steep hills or floodplains or marshes, right? That kind of thing, where the fancier people didn't want to build because there was some sort of environmental factor limiting their ability to build a solid structure on that land. And so the squatters come in and they're like, well, if you don't want it, we'll take it. And so it gets them close to the central business district, but it is considered undesirable for some reason. And then you see kind of these other ones, right? So gentrification, again, happening down here, close to the central business district, part of that zones of maturity. Middle-class residential is going to be out on their periphery, but kind of just barely removed from your elite residences. You have got industrial sector, and again, you have a spine that leads you down to the market, because where are you going to sell the things that you manufacture in your industrial park? You're going to sell them in the market, so you need access. This almost every city that was around in the colonial era of the Spanish looks like this, is built in some version of this. The next one is the sub-Saharan African city model. And again, this also has colonial ties, specifically European, right? Europe colonized Africa extensively. And so you've got those colonial ties apparent in Latin America. You also have them here in Africa. So you've got three central areas downtown. You have the colonial central business district set up by the Europeans that come in. You have the traditional business district, or market, where the people who were there originally did business. And then you have this brown market, which is kind of a mix of the two. Surrounding the rings, you have your inner rings are higher income housing due to the proximity to the consumer and public services. So the closer you are to downtown, the more expensive it is, the fancier people live there. The middle, the mining and manufacturing zone, is around that. And then you have squatter settlements out here. In informal settlement, residential area where housing built on land the occupants have no legal claim to. So they've decided to settle there, but they don't actually own the land, and they really aren't legally allowed to be there. You'll notice that this is very simple. It's because in the Latin America city model, you saw really a law that was passed that said cities look like this. In sub-Saharan Africa, the colonists come in, and you have colonies from almost every single African or European country that is settling in Africa. And so a lot of those cities are going to look very different. There's no like consistency from one to the next. And so you end up with a more simplified version of a city model, with the things that they do have in common, or they tend to have in common, because of the different countries that were coming in and settling and helping encourage urban development. Next one, Southeast Asia. Again, you can kind of see pieces of each of the city models that we learned about that apply to North America, the concentric zone. So you've got kind of this sequential series of rings, and then you've got sectors, right? Sector here, and the whole thing is kind of built as a wedge. And then multiple nuclei, you've got like little things popping up within those zones. Again, European colonialism. Now, when we think about European colonialism and the legacy that it has had upon the development of cities all over the world, it can't really be overstated. Europeans colonized basically the entire world. And so you see the influx of capital and money from Europe into these new colonies in an effort to establish those colonies as efficient and productive trade partners, right? Like one of the whole reasons that you colonize somewhere else is that you want access to whatever resources they have available there that you may not have in your original country. And so you then need to put the infrastructure in place to be able to get those resources, right? Manufacture them, process them, and get them out to your home country so that you can utilize them. But in order to do that, they had to build up these cities. They had to develop the cities. That was how you were going to most effectively and most efficiently access those resources in the most profitable way. And so we see colonial influence everywhere when we study cities, especially cities in developing countries. Anyway, accounts for lasting influences of European colonialism. So looking around, you can see most of the Southeast Asian cities are built on water. And so right down, their version of a central business district is basically down on the water's edge, right? You've got a commercial zone right off the water. So the Western commercial zone, meaning the colonial, as well as the alien commercial zone, meaning the people coming in, or the original, right? Mixed land use, government zone. So this is where your business or your politics happens. High class residential, not accidental that it's right off the government sector and close to the port. And then new high class residential is basically your suburbs, right? As people kind of spill over. Middle density residential, that's going to be middle class. The further out you get into zones of both suburbs and squatter areas, so intentional settlements as well as unintentional settlements. And then beyond that is market gardening. And then you've got industrial centers on the far periphery. But again, this industrial center is still kind of attached to the city because where are these goods going to go? They're going to go right down here and then get shipped out. So you see elements of the same types of things, right? Where people live, where people do business, trying to make the most efficient possible productive way to process, sell, transport goods. And then Western Europe. So this is going to look very different because Western Europe doesn't have a colonial influence, right? Western Europe is medieval. And so you are going to see lots of hallmarks of these medieval influences because some of the oldest and biggest cities in Europe have been around for over 1,000 years. And so the example I've got here is Paris. White is who came up with this in 1984. So classic urban models don't fit. The central core has, okay, so here we go. Your historic core. Now I've been actually we've been looking to go on a trip. I don't know where I want to go. I'm kind of all over the place. I've been looking at cruises to Mexico, cruises to the Caribbean, cruises to Alaska. I've also been looking about going to Europe, Italy, or Brussels, or Amsterdam, or whatever. I've been looking at lots of things. But one of the things I've noticed is as I'm looking in Europe, when you choose hotels, you can kind of like tell what neighborhood you want to be in as a filter option in these online travel sites. And oftentimes they will have two. They will have one that says like historic downtown and then one that just says downtown because in Europe they're kind of different. So the historic core is where the original settlement was, where they have maintained a lot of those original buildings. Europeans are great for building excellent, long-lasting structures. And so you have churches that have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and forts, and in some cases castles or bridges, right? All of that is going to be part of that historic core. Right around that is, again, what we would call that second zone. We would refer to it as like your inner city, right, or your ghetto. This old working class areas, this is where their renewal and their gentrification is happening. And then you've got heavy industry on either side, because this was likely a river. You see it in Paris, you see it in London, you see it in Berlin, you see it in all of the major cities of Europe are all built on rivers. And so you've got heavy industry that happens down along the river because that is easy for transport, right? Trade, just put it on the barge and ship it downriver. Right outside of this area in the yellow is your zone of transition. People are coming in, people are moving out. There's kind of a lot of change happening in that zone. On either side, you have social housing for industrial workers. These are the people that are going to work down here on the river in the brown. And then again, you've got other pockets of industry all along those areas as well. And these are going to be the kinds of industry that aren't nearly as heavy. And so it's okay that they're a little further from the actual transport node, because the transportation costs aren't going to be too extreme because the stuff isn't heavy. The stuff you see down here is going to be like lumber and steel, and, you know, like quarrying rocks and that kind of stuff. Heavy, heavy, heavy industry. Whereas the industry down here is a little bit lighter industry. And then again, back, you've got different levels, different kinds of housing. So apartment blocks, this is going to be white collar employees. Your blue collar employees are going to be over here, right, in the brown. This is white collar, but maybe kind of lower level white collar. Next out, you've got, again, white collar. You've got, but this is more suburban, so you've got a little more space. The further out you go, the villa belt is where you've got a lot of green space. The houses are bigger, more like estate type of places. And then beyond that is the forest. And then over here, these little blue bubbles are your dormitory, where it's just mixed population, probably young professionals, really can't afford to live down in here yet, but still need to be close, and they don't want to live with mom and dad anymore, so they come over here. But one thing you'll notice is that the central core, especially this historic core, has narrow streets. It's very compact. The central business district were also medieval cultural centers. So there's more residents in the central business district. There's fewer skyscrapers. It's not nearly as tall as what we would see in like newer cities. There's a lot more public transit and more walkability, because there just isn't room for the cars because those streets are narrow in those original medieval central business districts. And there's varied purposes and ages of cities that affect those urban structures. So, you know, this is just a model, right? And there's lots of variations on this theme. And again, limitations. So limitations for the Latin American city model. Not all of Latin America was colonized by Spain. So not all of it follows the laws of the Andes, but a lot of it does. A lot of it does. Much, but not all. Urban expansion due to recent industrialization and the recent development that is being experienced in many Latin American countries is also not accounted for. And the newer Latin American cities without colonial roots obviously don't apply. Sub-Saharan African city model, we talked about this a little bit already. So much variation in African cities because so many different European powers colonized Africa, that the model is overly simplistic in an effort to accommodate multiple different examples. The Southeast Asian city model, Different cities reflect varying degrees of components from the main model depending on, again, different colonial influences and the time of their independence. So how long have they been out on their own, and how has that time impacted the development of that city? If they've been independent longer, you probably see more variation than if they've been independent for a relatively short amount of time. And again, just like with Africa, Southeast Asia was colonized by multiple European powers, not just one. And so you see some variance depending on who it was that colonized them. And then the Western European city model, cultural diversity, again, varying ages of the cities, original primary function of the cities, because they weren't all built for the same things, make a comprehensive model impossible. But again, we're looking for things that are consistent, and then we understand that there are variations on a theme when it comes to trying to make a model for multiple different situations, right? All right, that is the end of all the models. So now you've got concentric zone, sector, multiple nuclei, galactic or peripheral city model, along with edge cities. You learned about bid rent theory and why things are expensive in the city versus not, where stuff is created as a result, and now our regional models. So Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and now Western Europe as well. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot. We will do lots of practice. We're going to play spoons a lot to help us kind of take in all of these different models and learn how to apply them. But this is your last video for a little while. Have a good night, you guys.